Okay, friends, so this is the fifth video lecture in the chapter of middle childhood. We're talking about cognitive development. In the previous slide, we talked briefly about standardized tests, or the previous lecture, standardized tests and IQ tests. Here, I want to discuss just briefly a couple more terms associated with tests, but in this case, we have achievement tests and aptitude tests. Achievement tests are those that measure what someone already knows. So, like the end of the year testing, the ACT, the SAT, those would be considered achievement tests. And then you have the aptitude tests, and the aptitude tests are tests that measure what someone, or attempt to measure what someone is capable of. So things like the graduate entrance exam, those are aptitude tests. The LSAT, which is the law school entrance exam test, those are also aptitude. They're really attempting to measure if your intellect or your way of thinking will lead you to be successful in graduate school. Also briefly mentioned in this chapter are some legislation, No Child Left Behind, which critics argue overemphasized standardized testing, and it allowed for or legally mandated that the results of tests could be made public for different school districts. And there were also legislative consequences, so school districts could potentially lose funding if their students didn't do well. And amongst the many criticisms was that schools then would manipulate who would take the tests. So, like, if they knew a student would perform badly, then they would excuse that child from school or things like this. I mean, these were some of the claims. But the point is that it put a lot of pressure on, and it incentivized testing, but it didn't incentivize learning. And then in 2015, there was a new legislation that attempted to reconcile or remedy some of the problems with No Child Left Behind. Your book doesn't really discuss much about it, and I am terribly not knowledgeable about it. I certainly was very aware of what was going on with No Child Left Behind. Okay, so also mentioned here in this part of the chapter is linguistics. So linguistics is a fancy term for the study of language. And this is included in a middle childhood chapter because this is a time of rapid language development, and the child's understanding of language will influence or inform their later on cognitive development. But linguistics is a whole area of knowledge separate from others. And on this slide, it kind of breaks it down into the different areas or different sub areas of linguistics. You got, oh man, and I should have Googled how to say these words, but you got phonics, or in phonology, and this is the study of the smallest unit of sound. So like the alphabet, or even those would be the study of this phenome. So there are 45 phonemes in the English language. And then you have morphology, and that is when you put the phonemes together. That is a morpheme, right? So that's the study of putting the words together. Syntax, which is the rules about sentences. Semantics, that is how we use sentences. And then the pragmatics. But the point is that you could spend a whole career studying language and the way language gets used. Some more terms here associated or relevant to the study of language. You have lexicon. So the lexicon refers to all of the words of a language. Grammar are the rules of a language. And what's really interesting is, if you study like linguistics and cognitive development in children, is that the way children learn grammar, like they learn the rules of how to make sentences without explicit instructions. Children learn how sentences go together and how to form sentences, in preschool or before preschool, in toddlerhood, without somebody telling them. They just learn it through experience. And then contextual information. So this is intended to say that one of the things referenced in the book is how children are learning quickly and how they're using more context clues at this stage. A couple other terms here is bilingualism is a technical term for a dual language learner, and then monolingual speakers is somebody who only speaks one language, and that would be me. Our textbook does suggest that that it is more common worldwide for people to be bilingual or to have multiple languages, and how bilingualism puts a person at a cognitive advantage. Our ability to think in different languages actually makes it proves our capacity to think. All right, so then we talk briefly, because we always do, about the different theories of cognitive development. Hopefully some of these are familiar. Hopefully you remember seeing these in other chapters. You have Skinner's theory of operant conditioning, which effectively says that a child learns the use of language by watching and imitating being rewarded, or shaping, I think is your textbook term. But basically we learn language because we're exposed to language, and we learn to use the words that are used with us. And then as the adults guide us, prompt us, or correct us, then we learn the nuances of language. Chomsky, who is a very famous linguist, he argued that basically people are biologically prepared to learn language, that humans have a language acquisition device, that our brains are naturally programmed to learn language, and he supports his position by noting that all over the world, children will learn the language in a similar structure, and they make similar mistakes when they learn language. That they learn that all languages have like a noun-verb arrangement, and children will learn the world over without explicit instruction that they will learn the noun-verb arrangement of the culture in which they are born into. And this is because we're biologically prepared to learn language, that we have to learn how to communicate, and therefore evolution has created these structures. You have Piaget. Piaget held this idea of schemas, and schemas were like collections of knowledge. And so children would develop these schemas, these little collections of what they knew, and then as they learned new information, they would either have to assimilate or accommodate. So what they meant by assimilate is that what they had got new information was to say assimilate the environment to fit what they know. So with whatever information they had, they would then impose that information on the environment and try to explain the environment. Or they could accommodate, and that would mean that the new information that they learned, they would change the way they think, the way they thought. Oh, I don't have any good examples. I do believe I put a video up about assimilation and accommodation. But the idea is that, and I think we talked about this in a previous slide, that I hold a certain amount of knowledge and understanding about the world, and then as I get new information, as I learn new things, I have to either make what I learned fit in to what I already know, or that would be accommodate, or I have to take what I know and use it to explain what's happening in the environment. So it's all, anyway, but it's the idea, it's the idea that I have to take the knowledge and do something with it. And then we've talked about Vygotsky, as I've said in previous lectures, is one of them that kind of makes sense to me. And Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. And at the core of Vygotsky's theory is that we are social creatures, and that we learn everything through social interaction. So we learn language by interacting with other people. Again, we have to learn language in order to be a part of our culture. So, and it is through interaction with others that we learn language. So this reminds me of my sociology class, where I have a story about Jeannie, who spends the first 12 years of her life in a baby seat. She does not learn language because no one interacts with her. So we learn through scaffolding with more knowledgeable adults. I'm going to stop right here, and when I come back in the next one, I'll talk about learning to read.